Good day, everyone. This is Rita Choi, founder of Asia HRM. Asia HRM is a human resources community for Asia, focusing on leadership and coaching. We help companies build high-performing teams. We even use coaching for employees' well-being. If you want to know more about this, just let us know. As mentioned in our previous sessions, we have conducted a survey on top challenges faced by HR leaders in Hong Kong. And to tackle these challenges, starting this August, we have embarked on a series of webinars on tackling all these challenges. And today, time really flies. Today is the second last session for the Hong Kong series, meaning that next Wednesday will be the last session for Hong Kong. After that, we'll move on to Singapore because we believe that Hong Kong is not alone. Other organizations in different countries, we also experience similar challenges. We love to hear the insights and actionable steps from the HR leaders of different countries. Just stay tuned for more details. Apart from that, we will also be organizing a Human Resources Leaders Forum to give you the best answers to all these top challenges. We will be having it physically in Hong Kong in the afternoon of the 27th of November. We will be sending all these details this week. If you happen to be in Hong Kong, you are more than happy to join us. Okay, so back to our session for today. Unlock your team's full potential. The power of psychological safety. I really love this topic because without psychological safety, we'll never be able to win the trust of our employees. We are so glad that we have invited an expert in this area, who is Stephen Philby, the former head of talent management and learning at the Hong Kong Jockey Club. Let me give you a big intro about Stephen. Stephen has been in various roles in human resources and L&D, leadership and learning and development, for over 25 years. He has worked in diverse industries and companies, from startups to large multinationals. For example, Expedia, PayPal, and most recently, the Hong Kong Jockey Club. From his experience, he discovered that a big factor that impacted motivation and performance was psychological safety. He recently left the Hong Kong Jockey Club to start his own business company, Perform Asia, to help businesses drive psychological safety and increase team leadership skills. Without further ado, I'd love to pass the control to Stephen so that he can unveil the power of psychological safety to every one of us. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Rita. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about psychological safety because it's a subject I'm absolutely passionate about, because I realize the power, how it can really drive performance and success, and the opposite of not having psychological safety, how damaging that can be to employees' motivation and even their mental well-being. So a very important subject. So we'll particularly talk today about psychological safety and how it fuels motivation and engagement in teams as well as performance. So, and it's something you can start fostering today, even though we have a very short session here with allowing for questions and answers. The session's only going to be about 20 minutes. And so I'm only going to have a short session, but there still might be some things that you learn that you can put into place today to encourage psychological safety in your workplace. So let's move a slide. So the objectives of the session today are to define and connect, clearly understand psychological safety and its direct link to higher engagement and motivation, and identify roadblocks, recognize common challenges to hindering psychological safety and learn how to proactively address them. And develop an action plan, design concrete actionable steps to cultivate a truly safe and inclusive environment. And as I said, it's something you can start fostering today so you can implement those actions. So I want to start off with having a bit of interactivity here. I'd like you to type in comments how you would define psychological safety. Just a few words, but if you could share in the comment section. And I'll just give it a minute or so for you all to type in your ideas on what you think psychological safety is. There's no right or wrong here, just very interested to hear what you think. A tool to earn the trust of our employees. Absolutely. Psychological safety links quite heavily to trust. Very difficult to have psychological safety without trust. Anyone else want to have a guess at what the definition is? Or maybe you know it. I'm only seeing one suggestion at the moment. Here we go. Psychological protection. Absolutely. Give it 10 more seconds. Okay, well, still carry on typing your thoughts, but I will reveal two definitions. The first definition is from somebody who is the guru of psychological safety. Her name's Amy Edmondson, and she's a Harvard professor. And she's written several books, including this book that I thoroughly recommend, which is called The Fearless Organization. As I said, you're only going to get a very brief introduction to psychological safety here today, but if you want to read more, get this book. Very good read. And Amy Edmondson said, psychological safety is a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And we've got another suggestion here: sharing ideas, asking questions, raising concerns, or admitting mistakes without fear of judgment, criticism, or negative consequences, which is very similar to my definition, actually, which is where you feel safe to speak up, share ideas, ask questions, and even make mistakes without fear of judgment or punishment. So why is it important to have psychological safety? Well, one reason is it can be life-threatening. Not having psychological safety can be life-threatening. So if you can imagine in a hospital, and let's say a nurse thinks that a doctor is about to prescribe the wrong dose of a medication to a patient, and that nurse is afraid to speak up, then that can be because of lack of psychological safety. That could actually be life-threatening. And a co-pilot is another extreme example, where a co-pilot doesn't feel psychologically safe to speak up and tell a pilot that he thinks the pilot's about to make a mistake. In fact, several air disasters have found as a result that one of the reasons for the crash is that the co-pilot or the other people in the cockpit were afraid to speak up and question the pilot. Now, not as life-threatening, but could be threatening to an organization, is an executive who's afraid to question the CEO on a proposed merger. A manager might be afraid to introduce a new streamlined process because they're worried if it goes wrong, they might be punished. In fact, lack of psychological safety really stifles innovation, because if people have a fear of making a mistake or doing something wrong, then they're not going to try anything new. And not trying anything new isn't very helpful for innovation. It could be an employee who's afraid to make a suggestion in a meeting because of fear of being ridiculed. And who knows, that suggestion could be a really powerful one that could help the business make a lot of money or be more successful, but they're afraid to speak up. So I want to ask you another question now. Have you ever felt hesitant to speak up in a meeting or share an idea at work? What I'm interested in is the why. So share the why you might feel concerned to speak up in a meeting or share an idea in the comments section. Too shy to say anything. Well, that's a very common reason, actually. There are introverts, and sometimes introverts can be drowned out by extroverts in meetings or just feel too shy to say anything. Not to be laughed at meeting. Yes, people have a fear of being ridiculed at their suggestion. People might think it's silly and laugh at them. We've got one here, fear of being disliked, particularly if it's not a popular decision. Afraid my points are not valid or would be declined. So lots of reasons there, and all of those reasons really point to a lack of psychological safety. But when people feel safe, they are motivated. They're more likely to bring their best ideas forward. They're engaged, they feel included and valued, and innovative as well. They take risks, knowing mistakes are part of learning. Without psychological safety, fear takes over, and fear is the enemy of engagement. We've got a couple of other ideas, suggestions come in of why people feel afraid to make suggestions in meetings. Afraid my points are not valid or would be declined. When I shared previously, there was a total silence and a lot of awkwardness. So based on that experience, that's them putting somebody off making a suggestion in a future meeting. So we can hear all these reasons why people wouldn't speak up in a meeting, which could actually be quite damaging to the business, because those ideas could actually be very good. And when somebody's had one bad experience of something happening in a meeting, whether they're being shot down in flames or because there was a total silence and a lot of awkwardness, then that can certainly put them off making suggestions in future, which is very negative for the business. So here's some more evidence on why psychological safety is important. Now, Google did perhaps the biggest research project on team performance that's ever been conducted. They actually studied over 180 teams across the organization, analyzing countless team dynamics and performance metrics. Now, before they went into the study, they actually thought that what would come out is the teams with the most successful members, the most clever members, the best performing members as an individual would lead to the best performance of the team. But they found out that who was on the team mattered far less than how the team worked together. And they found that the single most critical factor for team success was psychological safety. So a really big study here, 180 teams in 2012, and they found that psychological safety was the most important thing for team success and performance. Teams with high psychological safety consistently outperformed others because members felt safe to take risks, voice their ideas, and admit mistakes without fear of embarrassment or retaliation. On the other hand, teams with low psychological safety struggled with mistrust, hesitation, or lower overall performance, even when they had highly skilled individuals on that team. So what can we do about this? Well, here is an example of 9 points on how you can drive the psychological safe workplace. And the first one is model vulnerability. As a leader, we're role models, and it's really important for us to show that it's okay to make mistakes. If we can admit when we don't know something or when we've made an error, that makes it far more likely that other people will do the same. This sets the tone for other people to do the same. Encourage open communication. So this is about how you invite ideas or questions or concerns. So always in a meeting or always as a leader, let's ask people, what do you think? Does anyone see this differently? I'd love to hear your perspective. And something that's important as a leader is in a meeting, instead of rushing to give your own opinion as a leader, pause and ask for the input of others first. As a leader, we have a lot of influence over our team members. And by making a suggestion or saying what we think will lead our team members down that path, that could actually stifle a lot of innovation. by us influencing the team members. So let's ask for their input first. Then when we do, we should respond with empathy and respect. We certainly shouldn't respond with, well, one individual of you there had an example of when they made a suggestion, there was total silence and a lot of awkwardness. We should respond with empathy and respect. So say things like, thank you for sharing. That's an interesting perspective. Let's explore it further. How you respond matters more than you think. And even if you really know that somebody is wrong, don't shoot them down in flames, or don't respond in a way that's going to make them feel embarrassed, because then they're far less likely to make suggestions in future. And that's really a barrier to psychological safety. So number 4, create a culture of learning, not blame. Well, instead of focusing on who's responsible for a mistake, ask what can we learn from it? More forward thinking, and this shift reduces fear and drives engagement. Then number 5, we have normalize feedback, both giving and receiving. So as a leader, again, we're a role model, and we should encourage people to give feedback on us. We're very used to giving feedback on others or telling others our expectations, but we can also ask them for their feedback on us and also on their expectations of us. So for example, you could say, what's one thing I could do differently to support you better? And by starting to ask those questions, then you encourage other people to ask those questions themselves. And something that's really great to encourage is an environment where people can give feedback to each other. We've probably had experience of 360-degree anonymous surveys, which are what you have to do because people are frightened of giving feedback to each other. But if you can create an environment where that's the norm and that's expected to get open and honest feedback from each other, and that's seen as a very positive thing, then you don't actually need an anonymous 360 survey because people are all the time giving people feedback for improvement. Number 6 is encourage equal participation, and this links to a comment that somebody made earlier. Ensure all voices are heard in the team. Avoid letting extroverted employees drown out introverts. Now, how can you do that? Well, one good way to do that is when you're looking for ideas or suggestions is have a round robin where you go around all team members and ask them for their feedback. So everybody has the opportunity to give the feedback. Another way you can do that is actually by asking the quieter members for their feedback. So saying something like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, whatever their name is, and encourage them to give the feedback as well. But often it can be the introverts who tend to think before they speak, who have really good ideas, and they can be drowned out by extroverts. So this is a very important point. Number 7 is create team norms. Well, it can be good to have a set of team norms, and that's what you'd work on as a team to create. And an example of one that you could have that links to psychological safety is we listen without interrupting and assume positive intent in all interactions. That's just an example. But if you have that as one of your team norms and you use those team norms, so it doesn't just get stuck on a wall or left in a book somewhere, but these team norms are used and referred to, then that can drive psychological safety. So, for example, somebody doesn't listen without interrupting or doesn't assume positive intent in all interactions, then they would be called out for not following a team norm. So that's trying to create an environment in your team that's psychologically safe. Practice inclusive decision-making is number 8. That's involved team members in decision-making processes whenever possible. This not only increases engagement, but also reinforces the idea that their input is valued and respected. Also, different collaborative tools that you can use to help with that, like surveys or brainstorming sessions to gather input before making key decisions. Number 9 is conduct a psychological safety check-in. Do a survey to see how psychologically safe your employees feel. Now, this is a survey that actually is perhaps better anonymous, because if a team doesn't feel psychologically safe and they're asked in a survey, do you feel psychologically safe? Then they'll probably answer the way they feel that the managers want them to answer. So that's important to have an anonymous survey. And before you have a big focus on psychological safety, it's good to do a survey first so you can get a benchmark, and then you can measure how you're increasing with subsequent surveys as well. So examples of the questions that you could ask on a psychological safety questions: do you feel safe sharing your honest opinions in this team? What can we do to make this environment more inclusive? So here's a set of 9 ways on how you can foster psychological safety that I've just been through very quickly, because we don't have long for this session, but to give you an idea of some of the action points that you can take. Now, we know that culture often cascades from the top, from the CEO and the leadership team. So here's a question to reflect on. Does your CEO and your executive leadership team model these points? Do they, for example, model vulnerability? Do they create a culture of learning or not, and to not blame? And do they respond with empathy and respect, or shoot people down in flames? Because these things are going to make a big difference to the culture of the organization. That's not saying you can't create a subculture in your own team. That's different, but it's difficult. And we are HR business partners. Often, a lot of HR business partners will be here. So one of our jobs is to work with the business to make the business better and help our executive leadership team and CEOs understand the importance of these points. So I've been through 9 points, and what I'd like to hear from you is one action you could take this week to create a safer, more engaging environment for your team. Maybe you got an idea from one of those 9 points, or maybe you have another thought or suggestion. Please type it in the comments box now. Start a survey. That's a great place to start. So you get a benchmark, a baseline of where you are at the moment. And also the results of that. A lot of CEOs and executive leadership teams want data, and that could be a good data point to convince them of the importance that they need to act upon in terms of creating a more psychologically safe environment to work in, because the survey shows that people don't perceive it as psychologically safe. Another 30 seconds, see if any encourage more open communication. A great point. Okay, well, we'll probably have some more come in, but I just want to go through to the key takeaway, which is psychological safety isn't just a nice to have. It's the foundation for motivation, engagement, and innovation. By creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, make mistakes, and be themselves, you unlock their full potential. So at this point, I'm going to hand back over to Rita.
Wow. Thank you, Stephen, for the insightful session. You talk about why, what, and how, right? Here's a question about psychological safety. So, Stephen, would you be able to read the question here?
Yes. What are the long-term organizational costs of neglecting psychological safety? Well, I think there's a big cost in terms of employee demotivation. People that don't think they're part of decisions, aren't asked for their input, or in fact are discouraged from making opinions and points, generally feel very demotivated and disengaged. And the outcome of that is they may leave the organization. And it's the very, very smart people who want to make these suggestions and points, but feel they can't because they're not in a safe environment, that are likely to leave the organization. So I think that's one of the costs, lack of employee engagement, but also lack of employee retention as employees leave to go to other organizations. And the other organization cost is if you're not getting suggestions, there could be staff out there with some incredible suggestions on how the business could be doing better. But if they don't feel psychologically safe to make their suggestion, they're not going to come up with them. So then you just have to assume that it's just the CEO and executive leadership team that have all the best ideas. And they could be quite far removed from the customer base and the coalface, if you like, where the people do have these good ideas, and it could put the shutters up on that. So that could be another big organizational cost of neglecting psychological safety. What role does psychological safety play in preventing groupthink? That's a great question. Let's come back to one of the points earlier, where as I was saying that a leader who gives their own idea or input first is likely to lead the group and create groupthink. Now, actually, any member of a team who gives their opinion or idea first can lead to groupthink. One way you can avoid groupthink is not just have a round robin, but have a silent minute at first where people write down their ideas on a piece of paper, so they're not led by anybody else in the group. They're writing their ideas by themselves on a piece of paper. And then you do a round robin around the room where each person gives an idea off their list until all the ideas are used up. And that can prevent groupthink as well, because there's a certain way whoever makes the first suggestion, if you're brainstorming, for example, whoever makes that first suggestion can steer a lot of people's thinking in that direction, which can be a barrier to innovation. So groupthink, yes, if you've got a leader and you're afraid to speak up, you're going to get groupthink. There might even be certain people on that team that you don't want to question, or you fear that you might be ridiculed by. It doesn't just have to be the leader, and that can all contribute to groupthink. So psychological safety plays a big part in avoiding it.
Wow. Thank you, Steve. I love your idea that write down their ideas, right? So that they don't feel pressured to speak in front of people. Just put their ideas in writing. I think this is an excellent idea. Okay. So Stephen, I have a question here.
Yes.
I believe that psychological safety is a kind of a cultural transformation for an organization. If the organization really have never had this kind of sort of open mind way of getting ideas from the employees and so on. So how do we get started to have this kind of cultural change, cultural transformation, by inviting ideas from the employees and so on, especially when we come from an organization having a culture of authorization, meaning that everything will be from the boss. So,
yes.
And really, the bosses do not have the idea that, getting ideas from the employees. So how should we get started to have this kind of cultural transformation?
I think a survey can help, because a lot of these bosses might not understand that people in the organization are actually put off making suggestions. And so a survey that shows that people are keeping quiet about things and suggestions they have and improvements to make could really open the mind to the CEO and the executive leadership team. I had an example of that where individuals at the CEO and executive leadership team really did not think that psychological safety was an issue in their organization until a survey was done on it. I think sharing with the CEO and the executive leadership team the results of the Google survey as well can be quite eye-opening, because it was a very rigorous survey, and Google's known as a pretty successful organization as well. So the fact that they did the survey and found this out, I think can make a big difference. So they are the things I'd suggest.
Okay, surveys, right? Okay, that's very nice. Thank you, Stephen. So it's now towards the end of our session. Any closing remarks for us?
No, well, really, maybe I just go through the key takeaway as well, because I think it's so important, which is psychological safety isn't just the nice to have. It is the foundation for motivation, engagement, and innovation and performance. And by creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, make mistakes, and be themselves, you unlock their full potential. So I'll end on that.
Wow, very nice. It's the foundation for motivation, engagement, and innovation. It's something that we can afford to miss, right, in our organization. Okay, thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for your sharing today. We have learned a lot from it. And as I mentioned earlier, the Hong Kong series will come to an end next Wednesday. So next Wednesday will be our last session for Hong Kong. Then after that, we'll move to Singapore. We'll send out details for the session for next Wednesday. So have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.